The real estate market is down big time in the last year, and in interesting timing, the government has created a new tax-free home savings plan. Does it make sense for you? We'll discuss it starting right now.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
According to the most recent statistics from the Ted Michalos Homeowners Bankruptcy Index, in the month of February 2023, 6.8% of our clients owned a home when they filed a consumer proposal or bankruptcy with Ted Michalos. That's the highest number since we hit 7.5% in January 2020, which of course was before the pandemic. But that number is well below the peak we hit way back in February 2011 of 35%. So that means that even with the big increase in the index this year, virtually none of our clients own a home when they file a consumer proposal or a bankruptcy with us. And that makes sense because home prices are still higher than they were 2 or 3 years ago. So if you've owned a home for a while, you probably have equity in your home to borrow against, so you don't need to file a consumer proposal. That's why people own homes, so they can increase their wealth. Ted Michalos is here. We're both wearing ties because today is picture day at Ted Michalos, so that's why we're wearing ties. Actually, it's so we look like intelligent financial advisors.
That's
so
right. We want you to take us seriously.
Take us seriously, so we're wearing ties. So now, you talk to people every day.
Yep.
You just got off a phone call 10 seconds before we started recording.
With a fellow that owns a house.
There you go. So how many people in financial trouble come in to see you? They want to clean up their debts and they say, hey, I want to clean up my finances so that someday I can own a home. How many people?
Just about everybody.
Pretty much everybody.
Yep.
Okay, so you want to buy a home. What do you need?
You got to have the down payment. And so that depending on how you're financing the house, that number can change. You got to have income stability. So you've had the job and your source of income for a reasonable period of time so they think you can make the payments. And of course, you got to have a house you can afford.
There you go. So okay, down money. It comes down to money.
All comes down to money.
All comes down to money. Down payment and then income and good credit so you can qualify for a mortgage. So if you have a small down payment, as you know,
right,
with a conventional lender, you need mortgage insurance. So CMHC, a government organization, is, I think, the biggest mortgage insurer. What is the minimum down payment you need to qualify for CMHC homeowner mortgage insurance?
So if the purchase price of the property is $500,000 or less, it's 5%. So I believe that means, so if you're getting a condominium or a detached home or whatever, it's got to have a fair market value under $500,000 to qualify for that low deposit.
And if it's higher, you
right,
need a bigger deposit.
Yeah, it's 5% on the first $500,000 and then 10% on everything thereafter. So if you're getting a $750,000 home, it'd be 5% on the $500,000 and then 10% on the $250,000 above that.
So another $25,000. Okay.
Right.
Now, CMHC only insures purchases of $1 million or less.
Which is kind of funny given the average price of homes these days.
Is like $100 million, yeah. And other conditions apply, including
right,
debt service costs and total monthly housing costs. The point is, if you want to buy $1 million property with CMHC insurance, you need a down payment of what you just said, $75,000.
Right.
5% of the first 500,000.
Right.
Which is 25,000, and then
50,000
10% of the other, which gets us to the 75. So. Right. Which brings us, in a long-winded, rambling way, to the topic of today's podcast.
Right.
If I can save money to buy a house, and I can save the down payment, $75,000 or whatever, where should I put it? That's the question.
Okay.
So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the pros and cons of the various choices.
Right.
And then I'll tell you the choice, you tell me the pros and the cons. And where we're getting to with all of this is this new thing, the tax-free first-time homeowner savings account.
Just rolls off the tongue.
The old FHSA. But let's look at the other alternatives first. So
right,
option number one, you save money in cash, you shove it under your mattress.
Right.
What's the problem with that?
Well, I mean, first off, that's the easiest thing to do. Second is you're not making any kind of interest on it. And it's not very safe. If your neighbors find out you got $500,000 under your mattress,
you got a problem.
Pretty sure you'll be moving.
Well, and if your house burns down, I guess that'd be an issue too.
Right.
Okay, so maybe it would make more sense to put it in a savings account at the bank.
Right.
So, okay, that's also pretty easy. What's the downside to a savings account?
Well, given that the government has created these different vehicles where you can get deductions and rebates for saving for your first house, it doesn't make a lot of sense to just put it in a generic savings account. I mean, if you put it in an RRSP or a tax-free savings account, there are tax deferrals and tax savings. So why wouldn't you do that?
Well, let's talk about that then. So with a savings account, you're not going to earn much interest on it, and you're right.
Nobody's earning any interest anywhere right now. So.
Well, and it's higher than it used to be, but yeah, there's no any interest you earn in your savings account, you're paying tax on it. So let's go to the TFSA,
right.
The tax-free savings account. So what's the good part about a TFSA?
Well, so the good part is that while the money is in that account, any interest or income that you earn is not taxed. So it's a way to accumulate wealth more quickly because you're not being taxed as you're earning that income.
Makes sense. And so what's the downside to a TFSA?
Well, I mean, it's relative to some of the other options. So if you put money in a TFSA, you're doing it in after-tax dollars. So it means it's part of your disposable income. If you put money in an RRSP, it's in pre-tax dollars. So you actually get a deduction on your income taxes, which can help fund the deposit.
So let's talk about RRSPs then.
Okay.
So the advantage is what you just said. I get a tax deduction when I put it in. So if I put $1,000 into my RRSP, there's $1,000 deduction on my taxes.
Well, there's a $1,000 credit, but it's a little strange. Yep.
And so if I'm in the 20% tax bracket, that $1,000 means
$200 refund.
Means $200 in refunds. Okay. And so what's the downside to an RRSP then?
Well, so the biggest downside is the whole idea behind an RRSP is you're setting money aside for the future. So if you take the money out, you get penalized for it. Now, there's a special clause for new home buyers, but in general speaking, you put money in an RRSP, you got to assume you're not going to access that money until you need it.
So let's talk about this home buyers thing with the RRSP.
Yep.
RRSPs are taxed on withdrawals,
right?
Except for the home buyers plan. So what is the home buyers plan? Again, we're talking specifically about RRSPs and the first-time home buyers plan. How does that work?
So first and foremost, I don't think of a withdrawal from an RRSP for a home buyers plan as a withdrawal. I think it's a loan. And that's if you get your mind around that, you probably have a better understanding of how this works. You're a first-time home buyer, so you haven't owned a house, or your spouse hasn't owned a house in the last 4 years. That's important. You can withdraw up to $35,000 from your RRSP with no tax withholding. So again, it's not really a withdrawal. You're borrowing up to $35,000, which you are expected to repay in the future. You're going to buy it. The money's going to be used to buy a house that you're actually going to live in. So you can't do this to get an investment property. And you're going to repay that money over a 15-year period. If you don't make a repayment every year, it's added to your taxable income.
So I like that. It's a loan you are getting from your RRSP, and you have to replace it.
Right.
Now, I'm going to throw the caveat out here that even though we are wearing ties today, we are not giving specific financial advice. So everything we're saying, you're going to want to do your own research, talk to your own advisor. So you said that you haven't owned a home in the prior 4 years. Okay, exactly what does that mean? Where are the deadlines? You don't want to be buying the house 2 days early or anything like that. So do your own research. We're giving you the general big picture here. And you're right. You take the money out of your RRSP, you buy a home with it. Every year for the next 15 years, you have to repay that loan to yourself of at least 1/15 of the amount. Otherwise, it gets added back into your income. So now we got the new thing.
Yes.
The good old FHSA, the tax-free first-time home buyers savings account. So let's go through and talk about this. Okay. So contributions are tax deductible.
So that's a benefit just like the RRSPs. The money you're putting in, you get an immediate savings on your taxes for the year that you put the contribution into the plan.
Do you have to make any repayments?
As long as you buy a house, no.
No repayment. So that's different than an RRSP.
Right.
The withdrawals, how do you say that word, are tax-free. So that's the same as
the tax-free savings account, not the same as an RRSP because you got to put the RRSP money back.
Right. Well, you're taking it out to buy, taking it out to buy a home. You don't have to pay tax on it from an RRSP.
Right.
But yes, you do have to pay it back. Now, with the tax-free first-time homebuyer savings account, there is a lifetime contribution limit of $40,000.
Right.
And you can put $8,000 per year into it. What are the contribution limits for a TFSA?
All right, so it gets a little complicated. For 2023, it's $6,500, right?
Yeah, and you are allowed to catch up on your contributions. Right. So And I believe TFSA started somewhere around 2009. So if you were 18 years old back in 2009, you've got 88,000 of potential limit in a TFSA. RRSPs in 2023, what's the limit?
$30,780 or 18% of your income, whichever is lower.
Right. So if you made $50,000 last year,
18% of your income is $3,600.
you cannot put $30,000 into it.
You won't have $30,000 to put into it, probably.
We're going to talk about that.
Yep.
But let's get back to the things here. So what can I invest in my FHSA? Well, I can put it in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETF, GICs.
So the same things you can invest in if you're in a TFSA or an RRSP.
Exactly the same.
Yep.
Okay. Now, it is a one-time only deal.
Once in your life. This is the deal we're going to offer you.
This is it.
Okay.
Once you buy a home, that's it. You cannot do it again.
Right.
So with a TFSA, you can take money out, put it back in and out, in and out.
Right.
RSPs, not so much.
Yeah.
It can remain open for 15 years or when you turn 71. So that's kind of similar to an RRSP. You have to convert your RRSP, I think, in the year you turn 71 or
Correct.
the year after.
Yep.
Again, check the rules. Don't trust what I'm telling you. A TFSA, I believe, can live forever. Mm-hmm. So if you think you're going to be buying a house 20 years from now, you don't start this yet.
Right.
Okay. Now, if I want to save $40,000, and I pick that number because that's the lifetime contribution limit in my FHSA, how fast can I do it?
Well, so the limit is $8,000 per year, so I guess 5 years.
And you can carry forward unused room. So
if I put $2,000 in this year, that means next year I could put in $8,000 plus the $6,000 more that I didn't put in from this year.
There you go. Simple enough. You could put in $14,000. So can I double up? In other words, can I be saving in both my tax-free first-time home buyer savings account and an RRSP?
Yeah, our understanding is that you can. So originally when the government put this, I hate this acronym, TFFHSA in place, they weren't going to allow you to double dip like that. But in the final reading of the bill, it was allowed. So you can do the TFFHSA and borrow money from your RRSP.
And what I will do in the show notes on YouTube is put links to what the government says. And the government's information on this, frankly, is kind of spotty because what they're showing you is here's the original legislation. And then there's a note at the top that says, oh, by the way,
we changed this.
We changed this.
And this goes into effect when?
April the 1st. April the 1st, 2023.
Right.
So you are watching this, if you watch this when it comes out in the month of March, this doesn't even exist yet.
Right.
But April 1st is when you can start contributing to it. So again, you want to check the rules to make sure you're completely on board with this. Now, many of our clients, as you know, are self-employed.
Right.
That's often what causes some financial troubles because you get behind on taxes and things like that. Is this TFFHSA a good thing for them? Because the problem with an RSP, as you said, is there is a earned income limit.
Right. There's a test. You can only contribute money up to 18% of your income or that the maximum limit, which this year was the $30,780.
So what about this new tax-free home savings account?
There's no income test.
There is no income test.
Theoretically, you could make $8,000 at a job and contribute $8,000 to this and have zero income for the year.
And as a self-employed person, if you have a corporation, you could be paying yourself dividends.
Right, at a lower tax rate, and then use that money to make a contribution as well.
Right, but dividends, I don't believe are earned income for the purpose of an RRSP. I believe income is income. Again, check with your own tax accountant because we could be wrong. Okay, so again, we're LITs, not tax or investment advisors, so don't be trusting us. But with that caveat, how should I decide what vehicle to use to save for a home? Now, I'm going to throw in my first caution,
right?
And that is, I think before you start saving for a home, you should deal with your debts.
Okay.
Because if you have...
Well, you get a better rate of return for sure.
Well, if you... Yeah, exactly. You owe money on a payday loan and you're putting money into a TFSA or an RSP or a tax-free home, it doesn't make any sense.
Right. In one case, you're paying interest at 360%, or is it 390?
390.
And the other, you're earning interest at 5%.
Yeah, so it doesn't make sense. And I think if you have credit card debt...
Yeah, it's still 20% interest.
Unless you're going to be earning 20% after tax in one of these vehicles, then it probably makes sense to pay off debt. So, okay, I am of the view that dealing with debt is the priority. Now, I also think that there are other priorities, such as emergency savings.
Right.
So before I put money into a tax-free homeowner's savings account, which I can only take out when I'm buying a home, I think you're better off having some money in some kind of emergency
Saving
fund,
vehicle. Yep.
so that if you get a flat tire on your car, well, at least I've got the cash there to pay for it. I also think you should be looking at your other priorities, things like an RRSP for your kid.
Right.
Well, if my kid is going to be going to school before I'm likely to be buying a house, and that's a priority for me, maybe I should be putting some money in there. Maybe it is to save up money to replace my car. Maybe my own retirement is of importance.
At least with the retirement, you can multitask, right? You can save for the house and for the retirement.
Right. That's true. So again, the tax-free first-time home owner savings account is a one-time deal. If I lose my job and need money to survive and I take the money out, I pay tax on it and I can't put it back. So that's not what you want to be using for emergency savings. A TFSA would make more sense. But, okay, let's say I've paid down my debts, I've got suitable money in my emergency fund, and I can afford some savings. Right. So what is your advice if my goal is to save for a home and I'm a first-time home buyer?
So you've already made the decision you're going to buy a house sometime in the next 15 years. You've got the ability to save some money because you're doing all those other things you just talked about. This new type of account seems like a no-brainer. I mean, the government's going to allow you to put $8,000 worth of contributions towards it. You're going to get an immediate tax benefit of that. For most people, in the somewhere to 20 to 25% tax bracket, that means you're going to get a $2,000 refund just based on putting that $8,000 in the account.
And and I agree with you. I think there really isn't a whole lot of downside to this. Right. I'm going to put a link in the comments again on YouTube to a tweet thread by Mark McGrath, who's a CFP, a certified financial planner. Yep. He did a really good job of concisely summarizing the thought process. And, some of his comments on this are that you should fill up the tax-free first-time home buyer savings account first, since it's tax deductible. And if you don't use it, you can transfer it to your RRSP.
Right, just like RESPs for your kids. If they don't use them, you can put it into your retirement fund.
And again, certain conditions apply. There's, limits and so on. But okay, so that's one of the reasons you're saying it's a no-brainer. Okay, if I end up not buying a house, well, it's not like the money is wasted.
Well, and the difference here is, so you put it in the RRSP first. There's that means test that's going to limit how much you can put in. And then getting it out for any other kind of purpose is difficult. If you put it in the housing account and you don't use it, you can always transfer it back into that RRSP account. So you win both ways. You're protected. Yep.
Both you and your spouse can have one.
Right.
So if you have the resources, you want to max out both. Mm-hmm. Kind of makes sense, right? And in effect, what you're doing then is you're doubling up on both the RRSP and the tax-free home savings account, and then doubling it again if you have a spouse. So we don't see any downside, assuming you've paid off your debt, you've got a suitable emergency fund, and you are a first-time home buyer and you want to buy a house.
Right.
Now, a couple of final points to address here. Since this is Debt-Free in 30 and we are the two bankruptcy guys, what happens if you have a tax-free first-time home buyer savings account and you go bankrupt?
It is not protected. So the funds in that account, just like a TFSA, would be seized for the benefit of your creditors.
So if you go bankrupt and have an RRSP, what are the rules?
So a couple of different rules come into play for registered retirement savings plans. The first is if there's a life insurance component to it, the plan is most likely protected 100%. Whatever you put in it can't be touched. If there is no life insurance component, so it's just an RRSP at the bank, we can only go after the funds that have been deposited in the 12 months immediately before you file. So if you've, so let's say you were at a company 5 years ago and they shut down, went to Alabama, your money got put into a locked-in savings account. You can't touch it. Nobody can touch it. Let's say you've been putting $200 a month in your RRSP because you're a disciplined saver. If you end up having file bankruptcy, then that $224 will be seized and given to your creditors.
So any contributions you've made to an RRSP in the last year, you lose if you go bankrupt, but anything that's been there for more than a year, you don't lose.
Right.
However, with a tax-free first-time home buyer savings account, even if you put the money in 3 years ago and you go bankrupt, you lose it.
Yeah. Then presumably, if you're talking to anybody, any kind of financial advisor, if they think you're starting to get into financial trouble, they'll tell you to transfer your homeowner savings account into your RRSP a year before you file.
Right. And that's an interesting question we don't know the answer to. So let's say I contributed to my TFH, whatever the thing is, TFSA 3 years ago. Now I'm getting into financial trouble, so I transfer it to my RRSP.
And if you did it within 12 months of the bankruptcy and it's not with an RRSP with some sort of life insurance component, my belief is it'd be seizable.
Mine too. Although I guess I would argue, yeah, but I actually made the contribution 3 years ago.
The court would get to decide then.
Right. And because this thing doesn't even exist yet,
we're making stuff up.
We're making stuff. There are clearly no court cases on it.
Right.
I think the real simple thing to think about is if you go bankrupt, the money in your TFSA is gone.
Right.
Simple as that. Okay, now I got a better question for you. You don't have to answer this question.
It's got payday loans involved in this question?
No, but maybe it should. So you can just pass.
I can think about this.
Pass on this question if you don't want to answer. So is the TFSA yet another way for the government to help the rich? That's my question. So let's think about this here. If both my spouse and I have never owned a home,
right, we
can each put $35,000 into an RRSP in the new home buyers program and $40,000 into a TFSA. That's $150,000 between the two of us in tax deductions, which if we are in the 50% tax bracket means we get potentially a savings of $75,000 in taxes. Right. Now, if you're a low-income person, you can't afford to contribute, you don't get that tax break. So should we be making it easier for the rich to buy a house at taxpayers' expense?
So the first question you got to ask is there a societal benefit to people owning their own homes? Traditionally, we've always said that homeowners, for whatever reason, make more committed or dedicated, more responsible citizens than renters. I think that's a little hooey, but that's always been the rationale. If you own a property, you're going to take more care of it. You're going to be more concerned with your neighbors' properties. You're just going to be a better member of the community. Whether or not that's true, again, not so sure. Are we letting the rich get away with something here? Well, when I read about this thing, the first thing I thought was, I can see a lot of wedding presents suddenly becoming TFSAs in the future, right? So your kid is 20 years old, they can't afford to save anything. 25 years old, they finish school, maybe they're getting married, and you want to help them out by giving them something. Well, you give them a $40,000 gift because they've been working for 5 years. They could have contributed $40,000 to the TFSA. They put it in their, they set one of these things up. They immediately get a tax refund, which means they didn't pay any taxes probably this year, and they go out and they buy a house. So I don't know, is that the rich I guess it's the rich helping their kids, but
yeah, it doesn't sound fantastic.
I mean, there's going to be a huge transfer of wealth in the future as the baby boomers all retire and start handing over their assets to their kids. I see this as an interesting vehicle for them doing that. So I'm a parent. One of my children is getting married. They haven't been able to make RRSP contributions. They haven't been able to make TFSA contributions. If I'm going to help them with a down payment for their house, and lots of parents do that, I'm going to tell them to put it in this TFSA so they get a deduction, and an RRSP so they get a deduction. So I guess in some respects you're right. So we're helping the rich buy houses, or at least we're helping the richest kids buy houses.
Yeah, and you're exactly right, because a significant percentage of young people who are buying a house today are doing it with parental help.
That's right.
And that was certainly the case going back a year or two when the average house was over $1 million. Yep. And if you wanted to have a 20% down payment, that's $200,000. Well, how is that even possible?
Well, you sell your firstborn.
That's right. So unless you are the firstborn.
That's not financial advice. We keep telling you that, people.
Not financial advice. So what do? Well, okay, I could just give my kid the money, but now what I can do is I can say, okay, here you go, kid. I'm going to give you $8,000 a year for the next 3 or 4 or 5 years so that you've built up $40,000 in your TFSA. The kid gets a tax deduction for it, and now they've got the money.
But based on my understanding of the rules, you don't have to give it to them every year for the next 5 years. You could give it to them all 5 years from now in one lump sum.
Right. And this is, again, a key planning point. You can contribute $8,000 per year, and you can catch up on old contributions starting from the day you open the TFSA.
So you got to open it first.
Yeah. So if you're 23 years old right now and you think you might want to buy a house in the next 15 years, but you don't have any money, you open it up now, put $5 in it,
Well, on your kid's 20th birthday, you're going to tell them to do this.
There you go. And that starts, well, provided they're going to buy it by the age of 35, I guess. Mm-hmm. And that starts the clock ticking. So you're right. 3, 4, 5 years go by, and now the parents can say, here you go, here's the whole $40,000. Yep. They give it to the kid. The kid gets the $40,000 deduction for it, which gives them a little bit of extra money. And I guess the parent could be doing the same thing with an RRSP too.
Yeah. Oh, so the RRSP, again, you could contribute every year, or you could wait and they could catch it up in the year buying a house. What I think would be interesting is, so if you did the $40,000 max for the TFSA 1 year, plus say you caught up $30,000 for the RRSP, your income was below that, so you got your income down to zero. Is there a carry forward or a carry back you can use?
Well, I think the answer is, well, you're right. You're kind of hitting the key point here that this is I'm
getting distracted by tax law.
Well, but that's what this is all about. This is a tax-free thing, so obviously tax law matters. There's not a whole lot of point in contributing to the point where you're getting your tax rate below zero. Right. Because you're not getting any advantage other than, I guess, the sheltering of the income that's earned in it. You can certainly carry, I believe, and again, we're going to get all sorts of comments on YouTube for people going, you guys are chartered accountants and you don't know how this works. Right. But I believe you can, when you make a contribution to an RRSP, you can deduct it in the year you contributed, or if you're doing it in the first 60 days, you can deduct it for last year or this year. Right. Or I believe you don't have to deduct it. I think you can deduct it next year. That's my understanding. Well,
so they won't allow you to deduct more than the maximum. So if you try to, they'll disallow a portion of it. So you're better off not to claim it. Yeah, and I guess, put it in the TFSA until you're maxed out. Right. To me, the big picture here though is, who has $150,000 between them and their spouse to be contributing over, let's say, a 5-year period to these tax-free vehicles? I mean, I believe professional athletes might fall into this category.
And other than that,
Taylor Swift.
That's probably, she's not an athlete, but I understand your point.
Musicians. Yes. So,
I mean, $75,000 per person over a 5-year period is, I mean, that's big numbers. Yep. Because that's
$15,000 a year.
Yeah. And so who has $15,000? That's after paying your rent, your groceries, and everything else. Right. You don't own a house. Right. So you don't have the equity that's built up in that. So, I mean.
Yeah, it boggles the mind.
It boggles the mind. So, again, to me, this is something that is designed to help the people who are already well off get even more well off.
Well, yes. I mean, my view of it is you're going to be able to help your kids do it, but.
Yeah,
the next generation.
So that means the boomer who is well off is helping the next generation. So if your parents are well off, I guess that's good for you.
Point this out to them right now.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Go talk to your parents right now. And I don't know. I mean, I'm not here to really give an opinion one way or the other on this, because the law is coming into effect on April 1st, 2023.
It does make you, so where were their heads at when this was put together? Because obviously they started work on this either just before the pandemic or during the pandemic, and they're bringing it into force now because the law has already been passed, and it's just going to, if we weren't talking about it, nobody's even going to know this was happening.
Right. This was brought in as a result of, the election or the election before that, where the politicians said, hey, everybody wants to own a home. You said that right at the start of the show. That's a very common thing for our clients to say. Yep. And so we've made home ownership unaffordable. And we can debate why that is. We're not going to, but we could. Obviously, making interest rates really low for a decade certainly increased the price. And now we've got inflation and we got immigration, all the other reasons, zoning laws and all sorts of things. There are reasons why it is unaffordable to buy a home. Right. So rather than dealing with the actual problem.
Also, while they're diagnosing the disease, they treat the symptoms.
Let's treat the symptom. So, okay, we're not going to fix any of that. Here's money.
This doesn't do that.
No.
Because it's the people it's treating are the ones that need the treatment.
No, but if you are in the, lower income spectrum, you think you got a shot at moving up a notch.
Well, but how this is going to play out. Everyone then that buys a house going forward, at least 5 years from now, is going to borrow a chunk of change to put into one of these accounts just before they close on their first house. just so they get that $40,000 tax deduction, even if they didn't save the money. Because who cares if I had to pay the bridging financing on it for what amount of time? I'm still going to get this huge tax refund.
So you're saying there's a dead angle to this.
Right. Of course there is.
I think you're absolutely right. So what people are going to do is they're going to say, okay, I think I might want to buy a house at some point in the next 15 years. I'm going to open one of these TFSAs right now.
Yep.
And then do nothing with it. And then if I'm in a position where I could borrow, or I could buy a house, then I will go out, if it's 5 years from now, borrow $40,000, dump it in. I now get a tax break for it.
Yeah, and your tax break is going to be anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000, depending on your level of income.
And boom, I've just picked up, 10, 20 grand
right
towards my house.
And you structure the deal properly, you're going to roll that into the first mortgage anyway. And there are all sorts of ways people are going to play with
Well,
this.
and if I can do that with my RRSP, then I'm getting double the bang. Now, of course, I guess when you get a mortgage, there's debt service ratios and debt and all that. Okay, so again, I go to my parents and I say, hey, can you give me 40 grand? No, we can't. Well, can you borrow 40 grand? I'll dump it into my TFSA. When I get my tax refund, I'll pay you back the first 10 or 20 of it.
Right.
And boom. So again, this is, I think, a fantastic thing for someone who has rich parents,
right,
or who has really high income, or who for some reason has savings. I think for the person who is your average person, we just did our Joe Detter bankruptcy study that we released back in February, and our average client makes less than $3,000 a month.
Right. So how the hell are they going to do this?
Exactly.
Right.
So this is not for the typical person. This is for the person who's got more money. So end of rant. That's if we're trying to help people with housing, is this the way to do it?
Right.
I'm unconvinced. Now, having said all that, the rules are what they are.
Right. So you might as well take advantage
of them.
Right.
So I think RRSPs are something that benefits the well off. Well, okay. I guess if you got a few bucks that you can throw into it, you might as well get your share of it.
Right.
Because it's there anyways.
Yep.
So I guess this gives, if you want the positive spin on it.
Well, sorry, we'll have a show on that maybe. I think RRSPs are actually much more dangerous than this, because you talk to folks that can't really afford to put enough money into the RRSPs to make a difference to saving some of that money. And then when there'll be clawbacks on the government benefits they would have got if they didn't have the damn things. So you've got to be able to put enough money in the RRSP that it makes sense. But that's a different show.
Well, and there are certainly lots of people, you can read them on the internet, who say you should be prioritizing a TFSA, not an RRSP.
Right.
Because the TFSA has much less impact on things like government benefits when you're retired.
That's right. Because they don't look at your assets when they pay you your government pensions. They look at your income.
Right. And so you're much better off prioritizing that. Now, it's true, you don't get the upfront tax break.
Right.
But if you end up being in a higher tax bracket when you retire, then
the whole thing kind of falls apart.
Yeah, the whole sense of it kind of doesn't make sense. So I think
it's another show.
My final comment on this is, we wanted to present how this works because it's a new thing. You want to understand what's going on. I think what you want to do is review it in your own personal situation.
Right.
We've now given you what the different options are. And I think if you've never owned a home and you think you might want to in the future, there's kind of no downside to this, provided, again, you've cleaned up your debt, you've got an emergency fund, and so on. So it's there. They wanted to buy your vote with it.
Did they?
So did they? Did they? So there it is. And you decide for yourself. Makes
Call
sense?
it a show.
Call it a show. So there you go. That is say it one more time, Ted, the TFSA, the tax-free first-time home savings account. And that's how it all works. I will put full links in YouTube to everything we talked about so you can go and do your research on it. And then obviously what you're going to want to do is go to your bank or whatever to set it up. And of course, the person at the bank isn't going to be fully clued in on how this works.
They're not going to know any of this stuff.
So again, I think this is an area where you definitely got to either do your own research or talk to a competent financial advisor, which when it comes to this sort of stuff is not you and me. That is our show for today. Hopefully it was helpful. Until next week, thanks for listening. For Ted Michalos, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.